Hey, it's Jimmy, and today we're going kind of back to this channel's roots because we're going to talk about some of my favourite Viking costuming tropes and mistakes from various media. And one of my first videos that did really well on the channel was about Viking haircuts and reenactorisms, and the channel's just made it to 100,000 subscribers, so thank you very much indeed for 100k, and yeah, let's talk about some Viking tropes. Sorry, it's just hit me that my channel's got 100,000 subscribers. Anyway. It's a little bit windy today. I'm in a garden. I do some volunteering at a local garden in my community, so you'll have to forgive my filthy fingers. I've been thinning out wildflowers, trying to create, less of a clump and more of a spread. Elegant drifts, Anyway, we're going to start with, in no particular... I've got a notebook, by the way, because when I first started the channel in 2020, I didn't bother with a notebook, but since then I've had COVID-19 twice, and it has done a number on my short-term memory, so... I have my little sefrdŷ, my little black book. Anyway, Bantani. So in no particular order, we're going to start with a big one, which is black leather, like my little sefrdŷ is made of. And this is absolutely black. This is pitch black. This is very, very dark. And you see this a lot in Viking Age media. You see it in the TV shows, in Vikings, in The Last Kingdom. You see it in video games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. You even see it in the slightly silly, very silly, extremely silly, what do you call them? Spoof programs like Northmen, where you see people wearing black leather boots and black leather pants and black leather armour, black leather trousers, black leather underwear in some cases, and it's not a thing. It wasn't a thing in the period. Yes, we have some evidence that leather was being blackened. We have early medieval manuscripts where people have little black shoes, but their black shoes don't look like my black modern boots, right? They don't look like my big clumpy gardening boots, because these are modern chrome tanned leather. These are modern chemically tanned, industrially prepared leather. And 1,000 years ago, leather was vegetable tanned, where various vegetable matter is used to help prepare the leather. It's tanned using human and animal urine. It's tanned using animal brains sometimes. It's not being industrially, chemically tanned in preparation for dyeing it black, usually. You could, in theory, in the period, alum tan leather, but bear in mind that alum has to be transported from alum mines, or places where alum is being collected and harvested, and that's very expensive. Also, if you're dyeing it black, you're probably using vinegaroon, which is a substance with an amazing name, which is a mixture of vinegar, acetic acid, it can be a wine vinegar, cider vinegar, and iron filings. And the challenge there is finding a blacksmith in Iron Age or Viking Age Scandinavia with enough spare iron lying around that you can just use some of it for dyeing leather, which takes a lot of dye. Like, it's going to take a lot of money and resources, whatever the case. And even then, it's not going to look like modern black leather. Like, you can tell the difference between period dyed leather and modern dyed leather. It just doesn't look right. And it's a glaring thing for people like me, for reenactors, for archaeologists, for historians, people who care about the period. When we see black leather, black chrome-tanned, modern dyed leather in a TV show or in a movie, it just immediately takes us out of the immersion, right? It means that we stop suspending our disbelief, which is the whole point of watching a TV show or a film about a historical period, is to be like, I'm really there. Oh wow, a pop riveted black leather breastplate, that's nasty. Costuming matters. Costuming doesn't matter. Why do we spend so much money on it? So black clothes generally is number 2, because yes, black wool existed, but it's not jet black. It's not been dyed with Dylon in a washing machine. You're relying, in the period, on finding black wool or dyeing your clothing black by natural means. And again, that's expensive and that's time consuming. People often say stuff like, what about black walnut? Wasn't available in Europe in the period. People often suggest plant dyes that are very common in North America, which would not have been available in early medieval Europe. Viking Age Europe just didn't have access to everything we have access to in Europe now. It really didn't, especially the majority of people didn't. If you were a king or a queen or a princeling or a bishop, maybe you have access to silks, maybe you have access to resources from Africa or Asia in small amounts, but 99% of people don't have access to the sort of resources that allows them to wear a black dyed silk tunic. It's just utterly impossible. It's unthinkable for the vast majority of the population. So just people casually wearing black clothing, and especially black leather clothing, really is just not a period look. We should be seeing people wearing colourful clothing made of wool, made of linen, because that is what people were wearing. The vast majority of people in early medieval, Viking Age Scandinavia and the rest of Europe are going to be wearing wool in various achievable shades of reds, orange, pinks, yellows, blues, greens even. You can dye your clothing a secondary colour. You could dye it yellow and then over-dye it blue using weld and woad. You can dye it red using madder. You can dye it yellow using weld and then dye it orange using that madder. It becomes a nice pink colour if you only use a little bit of madder. So you've got this whole incredible rainbow, and you only have to look at what reenactors are doing to see how actually colourful Viking Age clothing can be. And many of the people that I follow and that I reenact with put huge pains into making their clothing accurate but attractive. They want to look good in their kit. We want to look good in our kit, and people back then wanted to look good in their clothes. Nobody wants to look grimy and miserable, and that brings me on to my next thing, which is dirty clothes. So there's often this idea that reenactors look too clean, but we know that in the Viking Age, the Norse were considered quite clean. They were considered quite hygienic. The letter from Alcuin of York, or to Alcuin of York, one of the two, says that the Northmen bathed once a week, and it is making our women look at them like the ladies are paying attention to the Vikings because they bathe more than we do, say the Anglo-Saxons. So people were bathing, people were washing their clothes. Linen is a very popular underclothing material for two reasons. One, it's nice and soft on your skin, and two, it's really easy to wash compared to wool. Wool requires some care and attention when you wash it. Linen you can just chuck into the wash and off you go. And you can wash wool in a modern washing machine with modern detergents and fabric softeners and stuff like that dead easily, but 1,000 years ago it was a little more tricky. Wool also can take quite a long time to dry, so it's quite resource and time heavy to just launder wool garments all the time. So people took care of their clothing by brushing it, people took care of their clothing by spot cleaning it, only cleaning the bits that were stained. You take layers off if you're going to do something dirty. We have lots of medieval depictions of men labouring in the fields without their tunics on, partly because it's hot, but also probably partly so you don't muddy all of your clothes. We've got plenty of pictures of people without their hose and shoes on because they're just going to get caked in mud, and then you have to wait for it to dry, scrape all that mud off, brush the wool, treat the shoes. That takes hours, if not days. That's a pain in the bum, just take it off. So people shouldn't be dirty when we see depictions of the Viking Age. People shouldn't be, sparkling clean with Hollywood white teeth. People should have teeth like mine. People should be, a regular amount of dirty. This dirty, maybe. You've been working in the fields, you've got as much of the muck off as you can, but you don't know about germ theory, so who really cares? That's fine, but nobody wants to look mucky, is my point here. And that kind of plays into the colour thing as well, right? Where everybody looks dirty and everybody's wearing brown, but like we've just seen, brown isn't necessarily what everyone's wearing. If you're very, very poor and all you can afford is undyed brown sheep's wool cloth, yeah, sure, but it doesn't take that much to just chuck a tunic into a dye bath for a couple of hours and turn it pink. If there's madder root around, if there's woad growing around, which there was in the period, you can dye it. You can dye it with that and get a nice blue. Yeah, it's a little more labour intensive, but it's pretty doable. You can even rub pigments on cloth if you're that desperate, but people had access to colour. Life was much more colourful, and one of the ways that people sort of displayed that colour is through jewellery, and we know that beads were really, really popular accessories in the Viking Age. We know that women wore beads. Strings of beads have been found in graves like the pagan lady on the Isle of Man, who was, ironically, we think, a Christian woman. We have plenty of strings of beads from the Anglo-Saxons and the Franks. We know that people were making beads on an almost industrialised scale, like thousands and thousands of glass beads have been found. Gosh, 4 o'clock already, where does the time go? And in too many shows we don't see this. In Series 1 of Vikings we do see strings of beads being worn and quite nice tunics being worn as well, actually. But then, weirdly, after Series 1 the costuming gets really bad and tropey and black and awful, and we just don't see this period jewellery in all of its glory. And again, look at how wonderful these beads can look. Look at how beautiful it looks if you have a nicely made, properly dyed, sewn and decorated dress with a string of beads and a couple of nice tortoise brooches, a silk headscarf or even a wool headscarf or linen headscarf. It can look absolutely fantastic, and people are rightly proud of putting together impressions like this because they look amazing, and we want to see more of that. That's what we should be seeing in TV shows, I think. Oh yeah, I put as an under thing in jewellery, one of the weird ones that you see is boar's tusk pendants, like men wearing a boar's tusk. I think we have like one find of a man, like a grown-ass man, with a boar's tusk in his grave, and we think that it was there as a sort of symbolic. It's a penis, possibly because he had his cut off, so it doesn't mean what you think it means, gentlemen. This isn't just in movies and TV, by the way. This is like just the tropes that you see. You'll see this on the internet. You'll see people wearing like all black leather with a boar's tusk and like 2 swords and no shield, being like, this is a real Viking. I'm like, that's not a real Viking. A real Viking would wear a shield, because going into combat without a shield in the early medieval period is very bad. Yes, people went into combat wearing broad axes and Dane axes, if you prefer, but they really become a thing in the 11th century, and they serve a very specific battlefield role. They are very specifically there kind of as a shock and awe weapon to do some damage whilst the rest of your line engages the enemy. Like, this is very much shields interlocked, deep formation spear fighting for the most part, and like casualties aren't that... I shouldn't say casualties. Death isn't that common on the field of the period, from what we can tell. Lots of injuries, lots of life-altering injuries, but not necessarily lots of people just being massacred in battle, in lines. Partly because of wearing shields and helmets are a thing that we need to see more of in media. Like, so many people in Vikings and the Last Kingdom go into battle without a shield. Like, bad idea. But also going to shield into battle without a shield or a helmet, incredibly bad idea. In fact, Charlemagne required that all of his troops, whatever their rank, equip themselves with a spear, a shield, and a helmet. That is basic. Alfred the Great took that idea as well for the Fyrd. The Fyrd men of Alfred the Great had to be equipped with a shield and a spear, and I think a helmet. Anglo-Saxonists, feel free to correct me on that. But these are the very, very basics of period armed service. Like, this is the equivalent of the enemy at the gates lie, where Soviet troops are going into battle and one guy gets 5 rounds of ammo and the next guy gets a rifle. This is that level of stupidity. Like, no. This isn't individual glory holding 2 swords. You are a member of my host. You will pick up a shield, join the shield wall, obey orders, advance when you're told, and not just break out of the line charging like a madman. I've got 4 dudes with Dane axes who are going to do that. The rest of you, hold your positions in the spear wall and in the shield wall. Engage the enemy, exploit their mistakes. Do not be dumb. Sorry, went into reenactment officer mode there. Anyway, also, if you're going into combat in the early medieval period and you can afford armour, you're wearing chainmail. And it's not called chainmail, it's called mail. We can call it chainmail. You know what I mean. I'm using a term that has entered the modern lexicon that doesn't cause any harm. It's fine. Also, it's made of links of metal joined together. You know what you call links of metal joined together? A chain. So, whatever. My pen is 100 years old. Your argument is invalid. Go into battle wearing chainmail if you're going to be wearing armour in the Viking Age. This feels like I'm now just doing like notes on somebody's performance. Oh, you've done very well, but I've got some notes on your performance for next time I come for your quarterly review. Your quarterly review, HBO. More chainmail, please. I want more people wearing mail in TV, film, video games set in the Viking Age. I know you want lamella armour because it looks a little bit samurai-ish. I know that you want the splint armour from Birka because, splint armour, protect your forearms. The huge majority of skeletal wounds that we have from period combat is to the long bones of the arms and the legs, because those are the bits that aren't covered by the shield or chainmail, because short-sleeved chainmail was what was being worn at the period because it allows for maximum arm mobility, it doesn't tire you out as much, and it protects the important bits, yeah? Like the arteries and the organs. You're gonna get forearm injuries. It's like in a prison knife fight, right? Where they just say, you're gonna get cut in the arms. Like, your forearms are gonna get cut to ribbons. There's nothing in your forearms. As long as your wrist's okay, you're fine. Just take the cuts. Like, that's the attitude. That is the attitude. And if you're a Viking, you're going into battle with the protection of the gods. And if you die in battle, you may well go to the halls of the gods to feast and carouse forevermore until Ragnarok, right? The attitude that you see in reenactors as well sometimes, where you just see this huge, vast amount of padding all over people to the point where they can barely see or walk, was not the attitude in the period from what we can tell. Yes, people would be sad if their friends and family died. Of course they would. But the attitude to armour wasn't, this will absolutely protect you from any injury. It was, if you're lucky, you hold your shield up, your helmet's well made, and you can deflect the enemy's blows, you might come back without too many injuries. You might not spill too much of your own blood on that field today, and you get to go home afterwards. Like, that is the attitude. And people on the internet will be like, but how could, who goes into war without armour? I mean, every soldier from the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, and so far 20th, 21st centuries from the majority of the world. Like, yes, people go into battle wearing plate carriers now. The majority of people taking part in warfare don't wear armour, except a helmet. You getting it? Like, yeah, the vast majority of people for the last, forever, have gone into combat without wearing huge amounts of armour covering them. The Romans wore armour, their legionaries all wore armour, because they were a professional, state-sponsored, standing army with the resources for it. And even then, they weren't covered head to toe in armour. The majority of men were wearing a helmet and a lorica, and carrying a shield. I'm going to stop ranting about that now and speak about something related to the Romans, which is short sleeves. So, Viking Age Scandinavia, cold. Modern Scandinavia, cold. Viking Age Scandinavia, colder, often, in winter. Okay? So, why short sleeves? Why so many short sleeves? Yeah, we have evidence of vests. We don't really see depictions of people wearing short sleeves. I can think of an 11th or 12th century manuscript where somebody's got his sleeves rolled up, but again, they're long sleeves that have been rolled up. I roll my sleeves up. I roll my sleeves up at reenactments all the time, and it gets on people's nerves, but I need that. And that's what we see. We see sleeves with rucks at the wrists. We see people wearing long-sleeved tunics. We find long-sleeved tunics. I'm not aware of any short-sleeved tunic finds from the Viking Age. I'd love to know if there are any. But put people in long sleeves. Costuming on TV, I think, is now often scared of doing things that the audience won't understand, like changing where the waistline is, and your natural waist is like just below your ribs, so that's where your belt should go. If you're wearing a Viking Age tunic, your belt should go at the waist, and your belt should also not dangle down towards your knees. That's so impractical. That's so annoying. Yes, there was a fashion in later centuries for long belts, but in the Viking Age, like a little bit of strap with a strap end showing. And ruck your tunic over your belt, for goodness sake. Ruck it over. That's what we see. We see depictions of people with the tunic's rucked over their belts. It looks good. It looks nice. It looks period. It's what we want to see. Yeah, this is mostly menswear, but there are some women's wear tropes that you see as well, like really complex later medieval and fantasy hairstyles. And the majority of the hairstyles that we've got evidence for are like fairly simple plaits, ponytails. Later on, you see like ribbons wrapped through plaits, and then the plaits curled on top of the head. But also no head coverings. Like, there are so few head coverings in lots of medieval media. And I have to give credit to King and Conqueror for this, where they did do a lot of head coverings for the women involved. They kind of went ham on the head coverings for women. Christian women of the period, and many Christian women today, wore head coverings daily, all the time, when they were in public. And that was partly a religious thing, it was partly a fashion thing. But in non-Christian Scandinavia, let's call it that, or pre-Christian, let's call it pre-Christianized Scandinavia, we don't have the evidence that women needed to wear head coverings, but we do have evidence of headscarves like the Dublin cap. Caps are a nice thing to have. They keep your hair clean. If you're working around fire, if you're working in poor weather, it can be nice just to have a cap. Headgear is more of a thing, and I'd like to see more headgear in Viking Age media. It really helps. It helps with the immersion. It helps with the immersion. And it makes people like me go, ooh, look, a Dublin cap. That's cool. We like that. And things like tablet woven bands are all nice things that you can combine with that. Like, you can have a nice headscarf with a tablet woven band, for example, which looks really cool. It looks great. I think it looks elegant. I think it looks very sophisticated and very elegant. And you can pair that with the classic Norse tortoise brooch and a dress look. Although that is sort of an earlier Viking Age look from what we can tell, I think that they pair really nicely. And yes, there were Christians in Viking Age Scandinavia. Shock horror, there was more than one religion around at the same time. In fact, religious syncretism happened very quickly, where the Norse religion combined with Christianity very, very quickly indeed. In terms of like a couple of generations, this seems to have happened, where we get this admixture of religious elements, and it's fascinating, and it's why Hiberno-Norse becomes a cultural term, because the Irish and the Norse, who have, at this point, Christian and Norse in terms of their religion, combine very quickly, their artistic styles combine very quickly, even elements of the language start to combine, and that's why we see things like Viking Age Scandinavian graves with penannular brooches that look like they were made in Ireland. That's why there's evidence that Irish craftspeople were working on things that were buried in the Osserberg burial, like the bucket, the Osserberg style bucket with a little dude. That was probably made in Ireland. So we should be seeing more of an admixture of a mixture there. Also, tortoise brooches look amazing with a string of beads between them and maybe a chatelaine style collection of keys and tools and needle cases and snips and that sort of thing. They are not menswear. They are not menswear. And I have now seen it in so many programs set in the Viking Age where men are wearing cloaks held closed with two brooches, one at each armpit. That is women's fashion. That is women's wear. That is Viking Age Norse women's fashion. And Robert Eggers uses it as a kind of gender queering element in the Northman, where a priest is wearing tortoise brooches, and it's really effective because it jars. Every reenactor I know who watched that film, that scene came on, and they were like, oh, because he's practicing the magic that makes you seen as quite feminine. That's really clever costuming. And that's the kind of reaction you get from the people who care. If you costume for the people who care. If you costume for the people who don't care, the people who do care get on your back and start telling you off and saying that you're doing a crap job at it. So stop putting tortoise brooches on men's clothing, because that would have been seen as extremely strange. It would have been frowned upon in the period. I'm looking at you, Norse Oath of Blood. I'm looking at you. Don't pretend like I'm not looking at you, all right? And yes, I saw the Polish Great Helm as an option on one of your soldiers, and we're going to be talking about that, but not right now. Anyway, there's not that much left on my list now, actually. I was expecting this to be a bit longer, but that's fine. This kind of ties into cloaks, I guess, is animal pelts. Animal skins and animal pelts just draped over your shoulders. That's not great. I mean, we have, as far as I'm aware, no evidence of people just wearing animal skins like that, particularly, because clothing exists. And even now, you see in the modern age, in the 20th and 21st centuries, we see people wearing sheepskin, but that will be tailored into a sheepskin vest or a jacket. We see people wearing fur that will have been tailored into a fur coat or a fur lining for a garment. In the high medieval period, we have fur-lined cloaks, beautiful fur-lined dresses in the Tudor period. They weigh an absolute ton. I know this from experience. They're very heavy garments, but they're wonderful, wonderful things for wearing in the winter because, and I cannot emphasize this enough, fashion existed. People cared about what they look like. And I'm going to give props to Norse Oath and Blood, which is a video game, for this, because one of the first characters you interact with is a seamstress and a weaver, and she talks about being able to make nice clothing for people. That is the attitude people had. They took pride in their appearance, to the extent that somebody wrote down that they cleaned and washed themselves. The Vikings cared about their appearance. They trimmed their beards. They combed their hair. We have hundreds of combs beautifully made in their own little cases because people cared how they looked. So if you think people were just shoving animal skins over their shoulders when it got a bit nippy outside, you are dead wrong, because what they were actually doing is painstakingly pile weaving wool into a varafeldur, which is what my friend Helena did, and it took her ages, it took her weeks and weeks, and it looks incredible. This was considered currency. In Viking Age Iceland, this was basically something you could pay for things with, because it was so valued. This is raw wool woven into the fabric as it's being woven on a warp-weighted loom, and it takes bloody ages to do it by hand. And they were making them with stripes, they were making them with colours, they were dyeing the wool pink to make faux fur linings and trims on jackets. They weren't just draping animal skins over themselves. So stop it. Take some fucking pride in your appearance and start wearing clothing. That's it. That's what it is. It's just take a bit of pride in your appearance. Wear clothes. Take some care over your appearance as a reenactor, as somebody costuming the Viking Age. And if the director gives you lip, bring them to me. Genuinely, if you are trying to costume something set in the Viking Age and your director is saying, "Oh, but that's not how they would have looked," come to me. Invite me to a meeting with the director, and I will eat them. I will grill them. I will grill them, and I will saute them. I'll do both. I'll grill them and saute them. They'll be very, very overcooked, and then I will eat them. I will consume them. So I will. I think that's pretty much it, apart from modern haircuts, and that's kind of... I've already done a video on that. It's like my first big video was the modern haircut thing, and the reenactorisms around haircuts. But I do want to do a video based off that soon, about Viking Age combat, because I've realised I've been going like nearly 6 years. I've barely done any videos on combat and on weaponry, and I think that's going to change this year. I think I'm going to do a few more videos about the fighting side of stuff. But that is my list of top tropes, my top tropes list. Have you got any others? Have you got any top tropes, any Viking Age top tropes in terms of the mistakes or the tropey costuming stuff that you see all the time? I bet I know what some of them are. I bet some of you are really done with vambraces. I know some of you hate vambraces. I happen to know some of you hate lamellar armour. But what are your top Viking tropes and mistakes? Is it in this list that I've just done? Is it something else that I've missed? Thank you all so much for getting my channel to 100,000 subscribers. I can't quite believe that it's happened. My play button is on the way. By the way, to get your play button, I didn't know how this worked. I didn't know if you had to send off for it or what, or you had to sit in front of a panel. If you're interested, what you do is you go to the Google Society Awards, and say, oh, I have this YouTube channel. This is my YouTube channel. Here's its name. Here's its size. I'm eligible for this award. And then they go, yeah, you are eligible for this award. Congratulations. What name would you like on your silver play button? And then you click yes, and they send it to you. So it's cool. So you don't actually have to pay for the silver play button, which is really cool. So, diolch yn fawr iawn I bob un ohonoch chi, felly, sydd wedi danysgrifio dros y 6 mlynedd dwytha. Mae yna goloman yn bita'n had yma. Astad bach. Anyway, diolch yn fawr iawn I pawb sydd wedi cefnogi'r channel, pawb sydd wedi rhannu fideos fi. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much to everyone who's subscribed in the last 6 years, who's supported the channel, who's shared videos. So ni'n di medru wneud heb da chi. I couldn't have done it without you, so diolch yn fawr iawn I bob un ohonoch chi. Tan y tro nesa, until the next time, bye-bye for now. Hwyl am y tro. Friggin' pigeons eating my seeds. Oi! I'm eating bastard.
Big, manly, horny, helmeted Viking thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. Look at them all. You are all wonderful human beings. Masculine Viking thanks to you all. Yes. Yes. Delicious name.